Thanks, everyone. Welcome to this Govern 365 webinar with Carolynn Chalmers on global trends, the growing link between good governance and organisational performance. In terms of, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat, and we'll come to them as we see them. Before I get started, I just wanted to share what Govern 365 does. Ultimately, we help simplify governance. We do an in-person or online evaluation with the combination of the board and the exec, which is really important that it's both present, facilitating an organisational health check essentially, and ensuring alignment on where you are now. We then help the group land on the top 2 to 3 organisational priorities to add value or reduce risk, and then we coach and support you to embed those practices and turn them into actions and value. So really alignment, focus and value. We're also running an initiative called Pay It Forward, where we're helping to get corporates to contribute 50% of the cost of an annual subscription, and Govern 365 contribute the other 50% for a charity to go through the process for a year. So if you know of any corporates, or you're a corporate and you're willing to be a sponsor, or you're a charity and you want to be sponsored, and you feel you get a benefit out of it, then let me know. There's a link I'll put in the chat. Let me put it in the chat now. Just so that, here we go. So there's a link in the chat if you want to find out more. One of the areas we evaluate is high performance governance, and what is good governance, and what will it look like in the future with all the major changes going on at the moment. So we've got AI, we've got climate change, we've got ESG, we've got the growing inequity in society, among other things. And what's the difference between average governance and great governance, and does it make a difference to the outcome of the organisation? So Carolynn Chalmers is she's a seasoned global expert specialising in corporate governance, IT governance and leadership. Served on various boards, audit committees, risk committees, IT steering groups. She's got a rich portfolio of global experience spanning diverse industries and organisations of all sizes. Her expertise extends to areas such as training, applying corporate governance codes, and developing standards like South Africa's King Report and ISO 37000, as well as ISO 37004. As a global leader in governance and the owner of 2 thriving LinkedIn groups, applying King 4 and Corporate Governance Institute, Carolynn fosters discussions among professionals worldwide. Committed to ethical business practices and effective resource stewardship, she remains dedicated to staying abreast of evolving governance landscapes and welcomes collaborations with like-minded individuals. Welcome, Carolynn. Fantastic to have you on the webinar.
Thank you, Gerry. Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be a fellow Southern Hemisphere country, which is fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for sort of staying up later to be here. It's much appreciated. So, Carolynn, governance is a tricky area, and if I know if I ask 10 people what is good governance, I'll get 10 different answers. So, in your opinion, what's the biggest difference between good governance or average governance and great governance? So what would I see in terms of a board of directors or directors? What would they do differently to great ones to average ones?
I think there are 2 really very important factors that I see. Besides what we use in ISO 37004 and the governance maturity model, for me, the 2 big factors are, the first one is that the board is engaged, and the second one is the board is supported, appropriately supported. So what do I mean by an engaged board? What I see is that the board is collectively being mindful and purposeful. So deeply considering matters and then purposefully overseeing that those matters are seen through by the organization. So it's that mindful and purposeful, and I really, that's a key indicator for me, is that the board is actually engaged as a board on the art of directing and the matters that are before them. The second aspect is on a well-supported board. I think that's when I'm looking at good to great, so to speak, great boards are very effectively supported by the company secretary or the administration team that's supporting them. So board members, the board members that you're appointing are very busy. They're very in demand generally. They are looking for support in terms of don't waste my time, provide me with clear indications, provide me with clear information. I'm wanting to meet with the CEO. I've got some questions. I need the board pack ahead of the time because I can't just read it the day before. I need to apply my mind. So that kind of, it's not an onerous task by a supporting team, but really you need to be cognizant that your board members are time poor and they want to apply their minds to be effective and engaged board members. So the right level of support to actively enable them to be good directors is really the two factors that I see the difference between good and great.
Okay. And in terms of let's say a great, if I'm looking at a board, observing a board around the mindful and purposeful, what sort of difference in behaviors would you see? What sort of things would the great ones be doing that maybe the average or good ones wouldn't be doing?
I like to talk about the business of the board and the board's business. So the board's business for me is about directing the organization, reading the pack, asking difficult questions, trying to help management see the wood for the trees, a bit of foresight as opposed to only hindsight viewing. So that is the business of the board. The board's business. The business of the board is the business of do we understand that we're doing all of the activities that a board should do? Are we setting policy? Are we determining strategy? Are we actively engaging the strategy? Have we considered new factors that are coming into play? Are we engaging stakeholders appropriately? Are we leading ethically and effectively? So it's really asking the board itself, are we behaving like a good board? Are we doing what we should be doing? So I see the great boards and the great board members are doing both. They're making time to be good directors in making sure that they are overseeing all the matters that need to be overseen and not just delegating, but also holding to account the committees that they've delegated to, or actually doing the activities that they need to look at, risk, etc.
Yeah, so you'd see them asking much more diverse, challenging questions than an average board.
And of themselves too.
Yeah.
Of themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a linked question here and that's come up around, and I've contemplated this before. Are boards teams, or should they be? So, if I think about an executive team, it's about collaboration, and you've got a leader, who different sort of structure. Boards, obviously, people are independent. The chair is not necessarily the typical leader versus exec. So would you consider them as a team? If what's your view on that?
So the best boards that I've seen, and it's something that we've discussed before, people talk about, the executives go through team building, you have team building days, that makes a good executive team. The board needs to be diverse and have diverse thinking, have intellectual honesty, and be true to themselves, but then bring unity in terms of their decision making and decisions made. The best boards I've seen are boards that have grappled with terrible incidents where they've actually had to get together, roll up their sleeves and sweat, trying to debate and dissect a problem with the executive team over a period of more than 12 hours. And at the end of it, when they come through the other end, be it a reputational issue or something like that, or a business continuity, disaster recovery kind of incident, the board is closer and it's operating more effectively. It understands each other better. Now, I don't see that, your normal team building exercises are going to do that for you.
No.
So, and I can't expect the board to go through a difficult situation like that in every board, but those are the boards I've seen that have been particularly effective.
Yeah, and the work I do with teams, it's about trust and psychological safety. And the team building events don't build teams. Areas getting to know people, building trust is what builds teams. So, which is what you're saying essentially is it's going through a situation like that. They've got to work together. They've got to listen to each other. Good teams will do that. They won't have egos and I'm right, you're wrong. So there has to be a collaboration and a trust to be able to do that. So essentially, what you're saying is, they have to be a good team. A team being, everyone contributing and trusting each other and playing their part. Yeah. Okay.
And it's not easy to get there.
No, and they're not meeting as often as the executive team. You're only meeting sort of a few times a year. So, outside of a crisis where they have to do that, how would a board build that into their rhythm, I suppose? How do they build the trust when they're only together 6 times a year?
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah,
it is difficult. And when they arrive at the board meeting, if they haven't been well prepared and supported, and they're not engaged entirely, and they are distracted by other board duties on other boards, or potentially even executive or consulting roles, they've got other priorities at the time, and that doesn't bode well for the discussion when they've got pressing matters. So there are tricks that you would know in your work on psychological safety, that just to check in, and again, that's the business of the board. Let's just all check in. Where are we? Let's have a meal together. Just that kind of activity. But it is difficult, and you do want to have some level of independence of thought. So you don't want to be collective, as in we all need to think and be on the same boat. We need to have our own perspectives, but at the end of the day, we need to be unified in the decision that's being made.
Okay. So someone's just said that the chat's disabled at the moment. I don't know how to enable it. So I will, so I'll put the Pay It Forward link up, or we'll get it to people. So see if we can enable that. So I think there's another question around groupthink, which is linked to this. So groupthink comes from people being afraid to maybe put a different opinion out there. So again, is that linked to this safety? When you get groupthink in boards, is that a fear of standing alone? And how do you overcome that as a chair if they spot that?
I think something that's worthwhile discussing as a board, and again, this goes down to the business of the board as opposed to the board's business. So actually having a sit down to say, and using scenarios, at what point is it worth your speaking up? So, sometimes there's an awful lot to be said on a particular report, in a pack, and there's an awful lot to get through. And you internalize, is it worth the effort to say this now? Will it really make a difference if I was to raise this point? And everybody's doing that in their mind. Well, hopefully everybody's got voice to make. So they're making that judgment call themselves. And boards, I find, don't actually sit down and decide when something is worth saying or not. And then what happens is you run out of time, and the chair starts wrapping up the conversation. And it could be the point that suddenly come to you as a result of the discussion, it actually would make a difference. But now we're wrapping it up, and the chair's wrapping it up. So I think effective dialogue is also where there is pre-discussion around what would be worthwhile saying and what isn't worth. What is the process of discussion and asking questions? And we don't do that. We tend to expect, this is boardroom dynamics. You should know how to ask questions by the time you get here. You should know what's worth asking, what isn't worth asking by the time you get to the boardroom. But actually, it's not true, because everybody individually has their own background and their own level of when to ask a question and when not to. And that also builds an effective board.
Are there any red flags that you'd say, as a chair or as a director? I mean, if I'm not getting any dissent, is that a red flag that there should be some challenge here? Or do we incorporate, things like the 6 thinking hats? What could cause this to fail? What's the risk in this situation? So force people into a situation where they're saying, what could go wrong here? What's the, what do you look for? If everyone's agreeing, then obviously that's a problem, isn't it? Maybe. Or
so I've had this discussion with Prof. Mervyn King, and he said what he does when the board all agrees is he will choose someone randomly and say, can you please, for the minutes, just justify why we're making that decision?
Okay, that's interesting.
Now that's a difficult one. If you know that the chair's going to ask you when you've made a decision, one of you randomly, to please, for the minutes, just justify why you've made that decision. While we've all made that decision, we all agreed. So just give us a justification, please, on why we made that decision. That's a really neat, not so nice tactic of a chair. And he also says, being a chair is seen to be honorific, but it actually at times could be horrific, because you're having to do things like that. You're having to deal with really nasty situations, bullying between board members, for example.
And you've had some experience of that in terms of being on a board where that's happened,
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's very interesting. A couple of times, and sometimes, you leave it to the chair. If the chair is not stepping up to the plate, you can point it out. But again, it goes to your own personal, how much is it worth it to you to really step up and make an issue out of it? And in one scenario, it wasn't worth it to me. And no one asked me, in this, I wasn't in a situation where I felt that I could freely engage. So I made my own decision to step down. Sorry, too busy, haven't got time for this. I didn't have time for it. So that's the problem. And unfortunately, it turned out that it didn't turn out really well in the end for the board, because the bullying was as a result of some personal incentives that were creeping, and conflict of interest that was creeping into board decisions. And the bullying was about that, the personal conflicts that were driving decisions. So you get all of these kinds of issues, in various types of boards. Yeah.
Okay. There's a question around, we as humans are easily distracted as such. I'm wondering if there's a checklist or cheat sheet to keep boards on track to focus on the business of the board that you still, is that something like, ISO 37000, or, we obviously got 1365 is linked to ISO 37000. Is that the sort of thing you would give people to go through?
Absolutely. So one thing we did in one of the boards where we found that we're talking so much about the pack that we lost focus on the purpose of the board. So we just started making a habit of having the board charter at the end of one of the packs, and we'd spend 5 minutes in the beginning of the meeting just confirming the board charter and how the board charter, that was 15 minutes, applied to the topics that are under discussion. That's quite a neat way of doing it. The other one, ISO 37004, gives you 3 different governance aspects to consider. So the behavior and maturity. So the behavior of the board really takes as its foundation learning organization principles. So can we recall the principles, the ISO 37000 principles? Let's have a 15-minute discussion on what principles in ISO, the 11 principles in ISO 37000, we're mostly going to call on in this pack today. So just reaffirming in your mind, before you even start the discussions, that this is who we are, this is what we're all about, this is the business of the board. okay, now let's go and do the board's business. So that's helpful. 37,000 gives you your principles. 37,004 gives you 3 different aspects of governance to consider.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move on to just what you see coming up over the next, let's say, 5 years around, where you see the biggest challenges for medium to large organisations, and what they'll have to face into, and what are the consequences if they're not prepared. So, where do you see what's coming down the line from all the stuff you see globally? Because I think you're dealing with some of the bigger organisations who some of that will come down to the medium size and larger organizations over the next few years.
Yeah. You'd think I'd work with a large organization, but I work with very small organizations too.
Okay, right.
But I see across the board in the large and medium, well, I mean, our large organizations in South Africa are medium compared to the US or Europe, some of the organizations there. But what I'm seeing increasingly is a real demand on capacity. So organizations, boards that have not got to grips with risk and how to actively govern risk. And risk is not just a colored picture box with, red, amber, green and ratings, high, medium, low, and that's not risk. If they haven't got to grips with that, they're going to be drowning very soon. The rate of change in the environment is tremendous. We've saw it initially, we went internet and Internet of Things and how we're going to leverage internet. And I mean, the first thing that we did was stopped everyone from using Facebook, that kind of thing, stop everyone from using WhatsApp. Then we found that those are actually productivity tools. We have to have some people accessing, change our frame. But really what you're doing right back from the early noughties, we were dealing with a change in having to monitor our changing risk appetite for certain new things that were coming down the line. Then we saw cybersecurity. So we're embracing technology, we're embracing digitalization, we're embracing the internet, and now we've got security, information security issues. So again, it's a risk play. Where's your risk appetite? What is the opportunity in this? But we just tend to take first of all, shut it down and mitigate it. And then potentially when we've lost all opportunity, we'll go back and have a look at it. Now we've got, of course, climate, biodiversity, all of those issues significantly impacting the producing countries, in particular, the agricultural sector, the mining sectors. Lots of opportunity, but also tremendous amount of risk for the sustainability of the organization. And if boards aren't in a position to find opportunities, to dynamically steer strategy, to actively engage in multiple capitals, not just financial capital, but to treat the resources of the organization as more than just financial resources, we're going to be in deep trouble. All of that is eating away at the capacity of the board. So the more we can put the oil on the wheels and bring in effective governance principles and effective practices, then we'll be able to deal with this demand on our capacity. It's not an answer to just create more committees. You can't do that, because then it becomes unwieldy and ineffective and costly. So we really need to get better at what we're doing, and that's a partnership between the executive team, the management team, and the board. There has to be an engagement between the two. Management have to play their part, but it's not only for them to play their part. The board must give direction. And too often I see that board doesn't give direction. Management must come with the policy and the board would look at it, because we only hear 4 times a year. No, actually, that's not right. You must come with what you want to find, what principles you want to apply. You need to have done that thinking individually before you even come to the meeting. Then put your principles on the table and then discuss it. Then you've got the principles that need to be applied as your governance policies. So don't always expect the management to come to you as the board. You actually need to go to management. So it's a two-way street. And unfortunately, we tend to say, the executive team they've got, they're working every day on this. We only work four times a year, but that's not how the partnership should work.
Yeah. And we know from research that alignment between the board and the exec and the working well together makes a big difference to the performance. You talk about risk, so risk appetite. And I see from work we've done that this isn't always well in terms of organizations. So, risk, I do see a lot of the matrices and trying to, put it into a precise science, which is not. So when you're talking risk appetite, how do you, because people will say my risk appetite on cyber is low, or my risk appetite on health and safety is low. What does that mean? How do you bring meaning to risk appetite? Because it's, just saying it's low doesn't really change anything or help you. How do you bring a practical side to this conversation around risk that means you're actually making some choices?
Yeah, and it can't be distilled down to single numbers. So we'd like to see the dashboard and go, oh, the risk's going up. And when have you ever seen us being alerted as the board on, oh, this risk is increasing? You get to the board meeting and you see that the arrow is suddenly going up. Okay, well, that means nothing to me. What does this mean? So it's the story behind the item that we're looking at that's important. So a low risk in information security for me would be how much can you afford to put on avoiding information security incidents? That's really what you should be looking at, because you can throw a lot of money at it and still have security incidents, because it's the nut behind the wheel, isn't it? It's the person driving the machine, and it's the bad actor. So it really, low risk is all relative. The risk environment is extremely high. How much are you prepared to put towards reducing that, and to what level? So it can't be these are our risks. This is our inherent risk. These are our controls. This is our residual risk. This is how we're controlling it, and we audit the controls to make sure that they really are. And that's really great in theory, but certainly as a board, we need to know the story behind that to be able to set that risk appetite. Those kinds of controls work very well at a management level. As soon as you start talking strategic, and I know ISO 31000 talks about its risk is the uncertainty on strategic achieving strategic objectives, and I understand it's strategic objectives, but your strategy needs to be dynamic. And also today we have to think about outcomes as opposed to just achieving a goal. And those goals are changing because of the changing circumstances. So it is uncertainty, but it has to be done in a dynamic context. It can't be static. It stays the same over the years, because actually your environment changes too rapidly. And I don't believe we have a good handle on risk either. So I think about in the South African scenario, I live in Cape Town. So we have a nuclear reactor, in fact, 2 nuclear reactors here on our doorstep, and the government decides to, make it 4, double it up. So we go, all right, what does that do? I'm a large organization in Cape Town. What does that do to my risk? Oh, well, it's infinitesimally small, the chances of anything happening. Yeah, but you just doubled up. Doesn't that mean anything? So, 4 nuclear reactors, 2 of which are expired, essentially should have, built in the 1980s, and 2 of which are brand new. So you haven't, so surely it's not infinitesimally small. And if it goes wrong, look at the consequences. So you've got a really difficult changing risk environment, not only, and I'm just using nuclear as an example, but just think about flooding and fires in today's world of, the climate change. There's different risk that we need to think about. It's a whole new discipline. And if we can't do that well, we're just going to be spending all of our time talking about those issues, and we don't have time to do that.
Yeah. And so I really like the story behind, rather than the metrics and numbers. The other one I've seen used is the what, so what now? So, what's the situation? What's the insights? Or so what, and then what do we do about it, if anything? So actually forcing people to, again, understand the implications or the potential implications, and then go, do we do anything with it or not? Do we choose to? So that's another one I've seen used.
Brilliant.
Going on to strategy and linking to that, there's a question here around, I believe the board steers strategy, or it should also design the reporting targets and matrices to trace the pace of performance or lack of it. What's your comment on that?
So we tried to put a fairly neat model into ISO 37000 around, I think, first of all, adding in the concept of value generation. And people talk about value creation, avoidance of erosion, preservation, those aspects. But the concept of value being more than financial value. So organizations today generally are only looking, from their purpose to their strategy is really on a financial sustainability basis, a going concern, etc. In 37,000, we've added this concept almost in between, translating purpose through value generation to strategy, to say that value should be considered in more than just financial value. How do you unpack your strategy when it comes to valuing other things that your stakeholders, you engage your stakeholders and you determine what is of value to your customers, to your employees, to the regulators, etc. So what would they value as well? It's not just what are the financial returns of the organization. So there is definitely another step in there that's going to influence your strategy. So once you've co-created the strategy with management, and management team has come up with these plans and how they're going to achieve the strategy, there was this talk on reporting. The next aspect is the oversight aspect. Obviously, the board has all authority in terms of law. The board then delegates responsibilities to the management team through the CEO or whoever it is, but also delegates authority for those responsibilities, and it needs to be commensurate. Delegating authority with responsibilities doesn't allow the board to abdicate. So in order to demonstrate their accountability, they need to get reporting back. How have those people that are delegated to, or committees, structures or people, used their authority to fulfill the responsibilities? And how have they fulfilled the responsibilities? And likewise, the executive will do the same with the people that they've delegated to, and so on and so on. And that's really where reporting stems from. It stems from the fact that I'm delegating responsibilities and authority. And when I'm delegating to people or committees, I don't want automated computer printouts to come back to me. I want opinions. I want insights. I'm using you as a person. I don't want ChatGPT to tell me, or some AI tool to tell me the answer. I want your insights. You're employed as an expert with certain levels of skills and competencies, and that's why you're employed in that role. So I need that to come through in your reports. Likewise, so that's on the one side, I need insights to come through. On the other side is with the strategy, together with the strategy are the parameters within which the strategy should be fulfilled. And those parameters are the directives that you give, the principles that you give to the organization through governance policies. So those principles, we never tell, as a board, we never tell management how to do something. We rather tell what should be done. So I use Peter Drucker, leadership is about doing the right things, and management is about doing those things in the right way. We shouldn't have procedures in the policies that we're adopting as the board, but we should have principles. So information should be secured. Now, whether you're using a NIST framework or a CIS or a whatever framework you're using in an ISO 27001 framework, that's not for us to say as a board, but our directive to the organization is information should be secured. Now, those reports that come back on the basis of policy and who we holding accountable for the implementation of a policy, that is factual. That needs to come back as this is how we've done it, and these are the results of our doing it. So when people ask about reporting and how the reporting should be done, there's really two clear aspects. There's the factual reporting, this is how we're doing things, and this is the way, and this is the numbers that go with that. And the insights that we need to get from people to their perspectives on things. Of course, then we have the assurance, the risk, the audit, compliance that gives us assurance over those results in terms of reporting. I'm giving you a very theoretical answer.
It's okay.
Practically, it's not so neat,
yeah.
But that's what you should look for, those aspects. So insights from, and management team need to be, you were talking about it, the psychological safety. Management should be psychologically safe enough to be able to give us their opinions, because that is valuable for us. We haven't got those insights. We're not there day on day. Insights, facts and trends, and then the assurance. Those are the three real aspects of reporting.
Okay. And sticking with risk and strategy, how do boards navigate the uncertainty in terms of global politics and economics and the impacts on the company's strategy? Are you, because you can get overwhelmed by this, what's the implication of this war or this economic downturn? Is it really coming back to what's the implications for us, and then what do we do about it? Because strategy is an ongoing conversation, and it's about the context, and the context will continually change. So should it be an ongoing, every meeting conversation about what's changing? Is it material? What do we do about it? What's your approach to that?
How I like the role of an independent committee member. That's where I'm most comfortable. It's I'm generally pulled into committees or boards because of my IT background or my ESG sustainability background. So I can bring additional expertise, just like you would have maybe your audit committee chair, somebody with financial background. So I like that role because it's really facilitating the board management discussion. It tends to be a little bit more open. But anyway, whether you're a board member that brings a specific skill, it's surely up to you to be sensing, and you do sense what's happening in the environment on your particular matters. So obviously cybersecurity, increased incidents, impact of what's happening in the Red Sea in the Middle East. How does that impact us from an IT perspective? Now, I would have done my thinking, but I don't know how it impacts the organization. So this is a real example. Recently, I called up the chair and I said, I think I need to just have a discussion. I just want to know that, because if we in the papers, tomorrow, I want to know before the organization's in the papers. So let's just have I'm responsible for this. We don't need the whole board. Chair, audit executive, chief audit executive, CEO. I'm IT, so bring in the IT person. Doesn't even need to be the CEO. Can just be the CIO, chief information officer. Let's have a quick four-way discussion. What's happening? Are you comfortable? Is there anything you need from us? Please alert us. Know that I don't want to see it in the papers unless I want to know about it if I read it in the papers. And then we write up a few sentences. Doesn't need management to do that. Give management a perspective of, I want you to tell us if you've breached this, or if this happens, or this. Don't tell me that, you've got 5,000 hits on your servers, I don't need to know that, but these are my specific levels of worry in this environment that we find ourselves in. So again, that goes to the need to have dialogue between the board and management on these things. So there are certain things when you want to just prick your ears up and go, hell, this is really important. I need to just check in with management, maybe give them an idea of how we would like to be communicated, send a couple of lines, 3 paragraphs to the board on, we had this meeting, this is what we discussed. You can hear from us if these things kind of happen. So that's how we deal with it.
Yeah. So is it about, because that relies on an individual raising it, is it about also creating time to air some of these things at the board or at the committee level, so that you don't just get into the routine of a full agenda and the act of sensing or reflecting or is obviously quite an important one when things are changing all the time.
Absolutely. So sometimes there is, so if something like that's happened in between board meetings, there'll just be a good chair will just take the time, to follow up, to say, did you all get that? Is there any progress, Carolyn? Anything to add? No, all good. Thanks, Chair. We'll update you if there's anything that's going to happen. So it doesn't need to be a lengthy discussion. The chair themselves could raise an issue, with management in the meeting, on sensing checking. But again, that's the business of the board. The business of the board is to have that foresight, the oversight. And management they should have the ears up, but really have their eyes on the organization.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a few minutes left, and I want to touch on another area of expertise for you, which is ESG. So there's lots of talk about this, and again, I know over here it's quite immature in terms of when we've talked to companies. And I know there's lots of reporting standards for the listed companies. So what do you see coming down the track for your average medium-sized company in this area that they need to be taking or being mindful of and preparing for?
I think a lot of the small companies are actually doing it anyway. It's the larger companies that have got they've had shareholder demands that have been very financially focused. The small entities, obviously financial, cash flow is material. So, but my only message to the small and medium organizations is right now, before you even start trying to do any carbon reduction or, anything like that, just start thinking more than financial capital. So the integrated reporting framework uses 6 capitals. So you've got your financial capital, but you also got your social and relational capital. You've got your environmental capital. You've got your intellectual capital. Of course, you've got your human capital, which is the capital in the organization. And then you've got your manufactured capital, what you're actually making and producing. So in all your decision making, just make sure you've got that information available from you. And when you're engaging with your suppliers, make sure that you're getting that information from them as well. Not just how much is this going to cost me, but where they're sourcing things, who their staff are. You ask the multiple capital questions, not just, is this going to work for me and how much does it cost? So that's just a start. And the fact that the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosures, was started by the Financial Stability Board. This issue is a sustainability. Sustainability is a stability and economic stability matter. Is the ESG that we're talking about today. Cool.
Excellent. Well, that's a good place to finish. So I just want to wrap up. So some great points I brought up in terms of groupthink, getting one person to justify a decision. I really like that as a little tip. The purpose of the board and reminding people at the start around the charter and how that impacts on some of the decisions. I think we talked about risk appetite and actually what's the story behind the risk, and not just relying on numbers and heat maps and things like that. And again, going through purpose, value generation, and thinking about value for all stakeholders, not just financial value. And then we talked obviously about teams as well, and just that psychological safety. So how do you ensure, whether you're a chair or on the board, that you feel able to speak up and raise it if you can't? So some great topics. Thank you, Carolynn. Just again, really appreciate your time and expertise.